Hello, Internet!
Hello.
This is Lisha Sterling from Geeks Without Bounds, and we're doing another mentorship this morning. Today is with the PeaceGeeks team that's working on an app called Service Advisor. Um, Darius, you were about to introduce yourself. Can you start off?
Sure thing. I started off as a volunteer for PeaceGeeks about a year and a half ago now. Started off grant writing, and I had originally moved out here to Vancouver to become a professor, and I fell in love with fundraising, starting with granting, and over the past year I got more involved with PeaceGeeks, and right now I'm hopefully taking the lead on this mentorship, taking part in this mentorship with GWAB. To have PeaceGeeks have an even big impact and help raise money to keep doing awesome human rights projects.
Sounds great. And Renee, since the audience might not have met you yet, can you just briefly introduce yourself as well?
Sure. My name is Renee. I'm the founder and executive director for PeaceGeeks. We've been doing PeaceGeeks stuff for about 3 years right now, and I come from a background of business originally, and I moved into a second career of international policy around, specifically around women affected by armed conflict, and PeaceGeeks was kind of the coming together of those two careers.
Sounds great. So the piece of PeaceGeeks that's in the Accelerator program is actually this Service Advisor application. Yes. But fundraising is sort of an organization-wide issue. So we're going to look at fundraising from both the organization-wide question as well as focusing in parts on Service Advisor. Mm-hmm. So I just kind of wanted to start off with some questions for you guys. I went through your website, which is at peacegeeks.org. And it says that you're a global nonprofit, and I was just wondering, you guys are based in Canada. I don't know what the Canadian 501c3 equivalent is. Are you a 501c3 equivalent, or what is the legal structure of a nonprofit or a charity there in Canada?
Yeah, so we are both. So we actually have two organizations. There's PeaceGeeks Society, which is a nonprofit society without charitable status, and there's PeaceGeeks International, which is a charitable organization with the equivalent of 501c3. PeaceGeeks International is effectively just a funding mechanism, and so we use that to fund our charitable projects, and then really all of the work of those charitable projects gets executed by the society, and any work that does not qualify as charitable also gets executed and funded by the society.
Gotcha. So what sorts of things are you doing so far in fundraising, just in general overall?
Sure. The primary avenues that we've taken so far have been grant writing and crowdfunding. So the grant writing lends itself specifically to a lot of organizations like projects. There's a lot of clearly defined impacts and outcomes. So we've focused on grant writing, and then crowdfunding has been contacting our network and sharing the information about these projects and saying, here's the partners we've worked with, and trying to get more awareness and support for future projects. At the moment, we are trying to build a more robust corporate outreach team, and we are also in the process of trying to improve our major gift asks.
Okay, so when you say crowdfunding, do you mean specifically using tools like Indiegogo and that sort of thing, or do you mean more like traditional not-for-profit fundraising where you just reach out to people in general and ask them to support your work?
Well, sort of both. I mean, we have a number of different mechanisms on our website for people to donate at any time of year, but we tend to find that outside of the context of a campaign or a very specific ask, donations tend to be pretty low. We have a relatively small donor base at this point in time, just because we're a fairly new organization. But having a campaign such as the one that we're running right now, which you can find out about at heroesforpeace.org, is and with actually it's at heroes4 with the number 4 peace.org. Is something that we run every fall, and so we've run one on Kickstarter. Sorry, not Kickstarter. Indiegogo was our first one, and we've run 2 on a Canadian platform now called Chimp. And Chimp is basically stands for Charitable Impact, and it's basically a pretty easy way of being able to get do donations and basically collect campaign-related donations. And the advantage is that it's the fees are a lot lower than Indiegogo would be. There are some disadvantages to it, and we're going to be doing some assessment on crowdfunding tools post campaign, but that's what we have been using.
Okay, so I'm going to come back around to that because I have some ideas and thoughts about that. So the next question that I had listed here was, have you done fundraising from private donations? But obviously, yes, you have. What sorts of outreach do you do when you're doing your campaigns? Do you reach out to the press to get them to notice you and run articles, or are you doing direct mail or direct email? How are you organizing the actual campaign?
Yeah, so there's a lot. We have not been doing press. We're trying to do a couple of pieces in the next 2 weeks, but it's going to be mainly local pieces, and that's an area certainly where we could be doing better, and we could use some help. We have been, so we're set up on MailChimp right now to send out our newsletters, and so we've sent out 2 to our mailing list so far, with a bit of information on about what the campaign is all about, a link to our video, which I'm happy to share with you here if that's of help, and then one of the components of this year's crowdfunding campaign that's different from last year's is we have this idea of giving groups, which is a functionality of Chimp. So in the giving groups, basically, we have individuals who are the leads of these giving groups who basically go on and say, first of all, what their role is with PeaceGeeks, what they are trying to raise money for, and then they also make a personal challenge to do something. So, for example, one of our volunteers on the projects team is going to commit to doing a really crazy hike here in Vancouver barefoot if he meets his fundraising goal. So there's stuff like that. So we have about 10 of those going right now, and so that's been great because it helps to reach out to those personal networks of those volunteers. It provides some content. We've also been trying to do more around trying to get our partners to get their voices on, and we just face a challenge that logistically connecting sometimes with our partners is actually quite difficult in getting some of the information that we would want, but we're working towards that as well, and so it's just been a particularly challenging period recently because we've had, for example, 2 of our partners are in Ebola-affected countries. One of our partners, the executive director, died about two weeks ago, quite suddenly, and we've got 2 partners who are named ISIS, which is not a great thing these days, but it's been very interesting to actually have conversations with them around how they've been responding to that. And so there's just been a lot of challenges just on the organizations that we're working with that are sort of unexpected, but they work in these very volatile situations. So it's just getting the kinds of stories out that we had originally intended was not possible, but we now have these sort of interesting stories to talk about as well. So that's interesting too.
Do you have somebody that does regular blogging for your site?
Uh, no, and we are trying to get into that more. It's been a matter of we have so many administrative things that we have to deal with, and it just feels. And then we need to get to projects, and it's as we consider blogging to be very high priority. It's just that it keeps falling off because of all the other priorities that we have.
Yeah, in my experience, you need to have somebody who is the designated blogger,
Yes.
or else have
The schedule.
a schedule where this person is going to blog on this day, this person is going to blog on that day, and you schedule things in advance. But it really does help to have one or more designated bloggers that blog on some form of schedule. Makes a huge difference. So the other question I wanted to ask was, how do you thank your donors, and how do you engage them after they've given?
Yeah, so during the campaign, we have been trying very hard to make sure that we're thanking everybody immediately as soon as a donation has been made. And then we also recognize their contributions in the annual report. And we also do a thank you post-campaign to recognize their contributions. One of the challenges that with the platform that we're using this year is that it's actually way too easy to give anonymously. And so we are discovering that compared to previous campaigns, we're not collecting nearly as many email addresses as we have in the past. And so that's going to be a huge consideration in terms of which platform we would go with next year when we do the same thing. So yeah, that's been, but we can do some stuff through the platform itself to try to reach the groups of people that actually contributed there, and we'll continue to do some thank yous, and for some of the bigger donors, we try to either do a personal email or a personal letter or a personal phone call, depending on what level they gave at.
So the smaller donors, is it just an instant email that comes back that is the thank you, or
it's either a thank you through the campaign site or a personal email.
Gotcha. Do you do any sort of gifts at different levels of donations at all?
We did that in our first campaign through Indiegogo, and we I guess the basic experience with Indiegogo was that on the one hand, it was great to have the incentive for reaching the goal because you paid 9% commission to Indiegogo if you did not meet your goal, whereas it was 4 if you did. But then on top of that, you also have PayPal fees or credit card fees or whatever. So you're basically losing about 7% of your intake right off the bat. And then in addition, we were seeing that for the perks that we had some water bottles, we had some stickers and stuff like that, and that was also eroding what we were taking in because we were having to spend a whole bunch of money in trying to do delivery for that. So we opted to move away from that, especially since most of the people that we ended up who ended up selecting perks during the campaign eventually said, no, we were just doing this to support you anyway. So we actually determined that it was a minority of people who felt that the perks were really important, but we're open to hearing different things and also different options about what perks could look like, because I think that there's ways that we can recognize people without having to deliver something that would be an option as well.
Right. Okay, so how have you connected with potential, just before I move on really fast, I'm like asking you a whole bunch of questions, I'm getting a big picture overview, and then I'm going to go through and talk about these things, so don't feel like I'm just, interrogating you here. I just want to get a big picture before I start narrowing in on some of the things that I think I can help with. How have you connected with potential corporate sponsors, or do you have corporate sponsors at this point?
Yes, we do. So corporate sponsors, we have a lot more in the way of people who are providing in-kind sponsorship versus monetary sponsorship. We we are trying to get much better at doing asks for monetary sponsorship because that is where, I mean, really we need money right now. And we of course want to engage people, companies as well with the in-kind stuff. We think that that's really an important part of what we offer as an organization. But we can't survive without the money. So we are, in fact, having that discussion around whether or not our corporate sponsorship, when there is an in-kind, it does have to have a cash component to it as well. And so just wondering, looking at trying to understand what best practices are about doing that. We have a couple of lunch and learns coming up this week with different companies here in Vancouver, both tech companies. And so that's something that we're going to be trying to do more of, but this is basically our pilot of that. Did you want to add something?
I was just going to add that the majority of our contacts with corporate sponsors tends to come through our board members, or Renee herself through warm contacts. We have tried cold calling, but that has the predictable outcome.
And we have had some success with the cold calls, but it's just a very low success rate. So we're trying to go with warm contacts as much as possible.
Yeah. What can you tell me about the lunch and learns? What's the deal with the lunch and learn?
So with the lunch and learns, I will be going into the companies and talking about. I'm going to be talking more broadly about the space of remote volunteerism, some of the stuff that happens, some of the stuff that we're doing, but I'll also talk about, things like what the Digital Humanitarians Network are doing and potentially what groups like you are doing and so on, and just kind of, I'm trying to paint a bigger picture of what's happening within this space, and then hone in on what part of that we're trying to take on. And then try to get people within those companies to engage, and then also to support, an internal social responsibility project to work with us.
Okay, I'm going to actually type that out. Corporate responsibility. Responsibility.
And we're not doing a very good job at keeping notes, so I'm sorry for that.
That's okay. That's okay. As long as you guys are talking, I can type. It's when I'm talking that I become completely incapable of keeping notes. Okay. The brain, mouth, and brain fingers, they don't
work.
Okay. So, at those lunch and learns, do you also make an ask for money, or do you just make an ask for volunteer?
So with the one company, I'm just trying to get back to our feed here. Sorry, I switched screens and now I'm lost. Here we go. With the one company, we have been actually talking to them for a year now, and they have been trying to figure out how to fit us into their CSR plan, and they are now doing donations through their company. So there's a process already happening with the first one. Okay. And so we actually have a sense for what kind of commitment we're going to be getting. It's just that part of it's going to come through the individuals and part of it's going to come from the company itself.
Right.
So really the pitch that we're going in to do the lunch and learn is going to be about trying to get them more excited about making contributions personally to that, and then the company's going to top up whatever doesn't get up to a certain level. So that's, we're happy about that because we have a sense for what we're going to be getting through that.
Yeah. Okay. That sounds great. Have you done partnerships with other nonprofits where grants were shared between you, where you wrote a joint grant for something, or where the other nonprofit was paying you for a service that you were doing along the way?
No, we have not yet. That is something that we've certainly considered, and we'd like to be considering more carefully going forward. We have talked about doing that with some of our Global South partners. It depends on with them. They're sometimes the organizations that we're applying to, it really doesn't. The granting organization precludes a submission like that. They would accept a submission from a Global South partner, and who can then contract whoever they want, which may or may not be us.
Right.
So, for us, unless we have a very strong, trusted relationship, we would not want to invest a lot of time into something unless we had some certainty, some sense of certainty that we would be actually, chosen to execute that work once the grant came in.
Right.
But in general, we really are hoping to move in that direction with other organizations. I think that's a bit of a different situation in the north, and it's certainly not true that there are other opportunities that are out there that would allow that. And we'd like to do that more. We actually consider collaboration with other nonprofits to be a pretty central part of who we are as an organization. So it's something we've been trying to move towards.
Okay. Have you had any government grants or any government contracts at all?
No government grants or contracts to this point in time.
Okay. Okay. So, before I get to my list of the things that I kind of brainstormed about areas to discuss, so on the campaign front, so I kind of sat down and looked at the whole question of doing Indiegogo or doing one of the other online campaign systems and realized, well, we actually have our own Drupal site. Drupal has UberCart. We can create our own campaigns using UberCart, and create campaigns where people can pay, between this amount and that amount, and get a certain reward for it, right? Or they can just name their donation.
Right.
And so one of the things that I have been trying to do, in addition to doing that for our own organization, or directly, so I've got one page that is basically a category within UberCart that is the Geeks Without Bounds donate direct page, right? But I've also been reaching out to other organizations that support us or have supported us in some way or another, our corporate sponsors, for instance, and said, hey, we know that you support us. How do you feel about reaching out to your customers and asking them to support us? Or how do you feel about reaching out to your employees and asking them to support us personally? And we will give you a page like this page that we have for us, but it'll be branded that it's you guys in partnership with them supporting us. And we'll be able to give you feedback about how much money was raised by your group. So, rather than getting into specifics about our other sponsors, let me just use as an example the School Factory, which is our fiscal sponsor. So the School Factory has a much larger database of people that are involved with the School Factory in many more places than Geeks Without Bounds does directly, right? So I reached out to School Factory and said, hey, would you reach out to your participants and say, we've got this campaign going with Geeks Without Bounds, go to this page and donate with us In some cases, the organizations are able to do matching grants, so they'll say, for every dollar you donate, we're going to donate two. In some cases, it's just a matter of them saying, support them with us. And for instance, one situation, I'm talking to a manufacturer and making it so that the gifts, the thank you gifts, are related to them because it's their customers, right? So the things that are coming in as gifts are actually going to be from them, not from us, as thank you gifts. So I'm getting, rather than buying their mailing list or, cold calling their people, basically, or cold emailing their people, it's sort of like an introduction to us through this other door. And because it's all on Drupal, it's relatively easy to throw together an UberCart category page that has all of these potential ways to donate. UberCart has built into it, PayPal options and other payment options. So, I set that up once, and it's good for all the campaigns that we do. I don't have to pay extra overhead to Indiegogo or to some other organization. If somebody's paying through PayPal, obviously I have to pay the PayPal fees. But if somebody's paying through, say, Coinbase gives not-for-profit organizations free payments, right? So if it's coming through Coinbase, we wouldn't have to pay for that, for instance. And I know that you guys do Drupal, so this is possibly an option to think about for future. Obviously not this one because you're already in the midst of this one,
right?
But it's a thought for future, and maybe something that we could play with together, because this is something that I'm experimenting with. So I'm gonna fail some and learn some through this iteration. And when you come around to your next campaign, if you decide to try this, I can share, more specifics about what has worked and not worked with this. Then you can try and improve upon that also, and give me that feedback. That would be really wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, so our typical cycle for this stuff is that we actually start to think about what platform we're going to be using in the summertime, and so that gives us lots of time to basically go through the pros and cons of the platforms, and to then pick one and then get it set up for the campaign.
Yeah.
So we'll have lots of time to do that. Yeah, I mean, certainly having an in-house tool would be ideal. One of the presentations that I went to recently on fundraising basically talked about how they basically said that your success rate is much higher if you keep people on your website, but it depends on how well you do the ask on your website.
Right.
So I think, I mean, we have recognized both that we want to be kind of not pushing people away from our website as much as possible, and two, that we what's the other thing? Oh gosh, I just had a brain fart. But anyway, I mean, but the one thing about these two platforms is that they are well recognized within certain communities. Indiegogo certainly has. Oh, sorry. The other thing I was going to say was that we actually want to start doing more project-based campaigns rather than. Up until now, it's been about supporting PeaceGeeks, and here are 2 projects that we're working on right now, or something like that. But we actually are thinking that, and our goal is to raise $25,000, but what we're thinking is maybe we have a $5,000 ask for this project, and then a $5,000 ask for this project, or something along that line. And then we introduce the organization that we're working with, and we introduce the partner and the people who are involved in what we're actually trying to accomplish together. And so that's kind of what we're thinking about going forward. It sort of takes almost a bit of a Kiva approach to it, where you get to actually know the people on some level level who are basically going to participate in that campaign. And we do those more frequently than just once a season if we went that way.
Yeah, and I think that that's a really good strategy also in terms of storytelling.
Yeah.
You know, one of the challenges that I've been having is realizing how many people who are actually actively involved with Geeks Without Bounds don't know about our successes, or don't know what projects we're working on right now.
Yeah.
And we're like, but we blog it. And they're like, we don't read the blog. and having those sort of single points of contact, those contacts where you're actually reaching out and you're telling a story and making an ask together. And that's, you know, that's the kind of thing that I think would be really good with having the tool embedded in your own website, because it gives you the flexibility to do that. You know, once you've set up the first one, setting up the other ones becomes much easier and faster.
Well, and we actually are going through the process right now of rethinking what a website redesign would look like. So that's actually something that would be a fairly integral part and priority part of what a redesign would incorporate.
Yeah. So just as kind of like an earmark for the future, I know that the summertime is going to be way past when you're in the accelerator program,
Sure.
But it would be great to sit down and talk about this stuff when you get around to that.
Well, I mean, I think that we have actually been wanting to incorporate a component of fundraising into the Amani platform. So actually, it would be pretty interesting to see if we could package sort of some version of what you guys have done and ladies have done into the Amani platform.
Yeah, you know, actually, that was one of the things that I was thinking when I started playing with this. My inspiration had been looking at NPR and public television in the U.S.
Yes.
And I also looked at other sites like Red Cross and things like that. And that had been sort of my starting point of this is what I want campaigns to look like.
Yeah.
And then I was also thinking in my head, because we're actually using what's it called? Open Thingy. My brain, it has gone dead. Open Outreach. We're using Open Outreach right now, which also uses Red Hen.
Yes.
And actually, the reason that we're using Open Outreach is because it uses Red Hen, because you had talked to me about Red Hen within the Amani project, and I hadn't, like, there was a point when I was putting together our Drupal site, because our old site is all in WordPress. When I was putting together our Drupal site, the Amani system I couldn't quite move everything over just then, so I ended up using Open Outreach instead. But I was like, it's Red Hen, it's the same thing. So if we migrate in the future over to Amani, it'll be an easier migrate. I was thinking.
That's good. That's great. I mean, that's great. And I mean, just a kind of a small pitch on Amani. And one of the, we're at a very early stage of this, but one of the things that we're really trying to accomplish this is having an open source alternative to Nation Builder. And so we're sort of taking again, we have a very small kind of piece of what that looks like right now, but that's, I think ultimately what we're trying to build towards.
Okay. So let me ask you a little bit about the press. So you said that you're trying to do some local pieces in the next couple of weeks. Do you have a strategy of you already know some journalists and you're reaching out to those journalists to speak to them, or are you just sending out press releases? How are you handling that side of things?
We've done some press releases. We have a couple of local media folks that we can talk to. We kind of recognize that actually the benefit of this would be getting beyond local, and that's where we don't have very much in the way of contacts right now, and that's where we could use some help.
Yeah, well, so one of the things that I'm working on, because I think that our fundraising campaigns right now need the help of a lot more press, because we're very, very hungry, and and we need to grow. Like we've existed for a while as this tiny core group of people who are basically martyring themselves, and lots of volunteers who do a little bit, give a little bit of time, and we need to grow into a stable staff that's able to do all the different pieces of the mentoring and managing the projects and helping the young programmers, or I say young programmers, but some of them are career changers that are just new programmers who are getting their first experience in a professional setting by doing an internship on one of these open source projects. We need to have more people doing those pieces, and in order to do that, in order to grow like that, we need to do a lot of fundraising. In order to do a lot of fundraising, we need a lot of people to know who we are and what we're doing. And so one of my challenges has been trying to figure out what are the stories that I want to ask journalists to tell about us. And one of the things that became clear recently was that one of the ways to get stories out is to have a story that's not just about one organization, but how two or more organizations are working together on bigger projects. So this might actually be an opportunity for us to kind of both go in on, like, hey, Wired, do you know about the great things that are happening in digital volunteerism, and how open source tools are saving the planet? So
yeah,
the outreach to journalists, Willow does have some contacts. A volunteer of ours named Lise also used to work in PR professionally, and, well, actually, she still works in PR professionally, just in a slightly different angle of it, and has offered to help make those sorts of connections. So, if we can formulate some story queries to send to specific journalists that we like, that we trust, that are going to get the word out to the sorts of people that we want to be volunteering and donating, we should go for that.
Absolutely. So how would that work?
Well, I mean, first thing we need to figure out what story we want to tell, right? What of the many different stories of the things that we are each doing and that we're doing together do we want to be able to tell? And then basically you put together a query letter and pitch it at a journalist. It's also possible to do a press release and pitch the press release at a journalist, but it kind of depends on what you want. Do you want the journalist to be, starting from the starting point of the story that we're telling and then building on top of that? Or do you want to just hand the journalist a story and say, here's all the details, make it look like you're writing and post it? We can kind of do either one of those, depending on, which kind of outlet we're looking at and what kind of an article. It would be super great to get some feature articles out there in the world, and not just, I'd like blog posts on sites, on other people's sites, OPS, but it would also be fantastic to get some feature articles out there, maybe in places where people aren't hearing about us at all. And yes, my sights are high. Wired, please. And maybe Fortune.
We would like that too. Great. Yeah, I mean we're sort of going after some pretty small local. Like I think the two that we're trying to do right now is the Georgia Strait, which is a Vancouver-based paper, and Tech Vibes. So we definitely are trying to get bigger than that.
Yeah. You know, and I think the story, for instance, the story about Service Advisor is a really good story. People care about refugees. People care about what's happening in Syria. People are surprised to find out that refugees and refugee camps have access to any kind of technology at all. I mean, people have this image of tents and, you know, people in rags and maybe starving to death and begging for food and mobbing the backs of trucks. And they don't realize that, you know, when people are leaving their home, they take what they can carry and what's really important to them. And if that person is, you know, a middle-class person in an urban area and has a smartphone, that one of those things that's in their pocket when they leave home happens to be a smartphone, right?
Yeah.
That kind of an idea, it just is really foreign to people. If you haven't seen it and experienced it, it seems like a cognitive disconnect to tell that story and to tell how the fact that people have these things in their pockets can actually help them and help us to help them is, I think, a really interesting story.
Yeah, well, I mean, and I think that I think that based on my very sort of preliminary conversations with UNHCR about where they sort of see this going, I think that they eventually also see this being a way of trying to get input from refugees about how this provision of services to refugees can be improved. And so for me, that's where it gets really interesting, because then it's not just about pushing information out. It's really about engaging the people who are affected by displacement in the conversations around how to better help them. And, you know, in a place like Jordan, which is the current situation that we're working with right now, the Za'atari refugee camp is very likely to become a permanent settlement. And so we're not talking just about how to manage a refugee camp. We're talking about trying to manage a future home, a current home, but basically that's going to turn into a, you know, their permanent
long-term,
long-term
situation. So I just want to check in really quickly. It is 10:59 according to the little clock on my computer. Do you guys need to run to another meeting?
I do. Darius can probably stay and chat for a little while longer.
Okay, well, I just wanted to, hold on, where's my backpack? Backpack. Sorry. I have grandchildren. Okay, so this book, can you guys see it? It's the Nolo Press. Oh, wrong book. That would be if you were an American company. The Nolo Press Effective Fundraising for Nonprofits. So this book, even for a non-American company, there are some things in here that are specific to tax rules and laws in the United States. But there's a lot of good stuff in there. I highly recommend the book to anybody who's struggling with not-for-profit fundraising. They talk about all sorts of types of fundraising, from you know, traditional supporter engagement through to crowdfunding, through to working with corporate sponsors. So it's really comprehensive. there's a ton of good information. And NOLA Press is generally just awesome.
So we'll definitely take a look at that. Lisha, there's one other thing I wanted to mention in case you are able to help in the meantime with, which is that I am going to be in New York in early November, November 5th to 12th, to attend both the International Conference of Crisis Mappers, where I will be doing an Ignite talk on the Services Advisor project, as well as to the Digital Humanitarian Summit. And so if there's anybody that we can be connecting with while I'm in New York that you can think of, or that you think we should be trying to reach out to, that we would appreciate any suggestions around that.
Okay, I will give it some thought, and I will also ask Willow. Willow has a lot more connections, and Lindsay too. Both of them have spent time in New York. I spent a whole week in New York, so I know some people on the internet who happen to be in New York, but they actually know people.
Right.
So I will send them an email and ask them, and also we're having a check-in tomorrow, so I'll remember to talk to them about that.
Great.
So Renee, I don't want to hold you back. Darius, if you'd like to talk for another 10 minutes, we can keep going if you'd like.
Sure thing.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks. I have bits of hair popping out all over everywhere. It's better if I just don't look at the screen. I'm going back to the notes. They look prettier. So, yeah, there was something I thought of just a minute ago, and then it went out of my head. Where was I? On the press. Oh, I just wanted to say that I really loved what you guys were talking about individuals being the leads of giving groups and having people like do crazy things like, you know, a trail run or something like that if a fundraising level was reached. That's super cool. I like that. Yay. So one of the things that I've read in a few things that NOLA Press book that I showed you talks about thanking your donors and your volunteers in ways that are not expected. Like right now, you're asking for donations, and in the future you'll be asking for more donations, and you don't necessarily have to say, you know, at this price point we'll give you this gift, but having an assortment of things that every so often, especially for return givers, you just surprise them with a thing. Oh, hey, look, stickers. Oh, hey, look, a bottle. Like, oh, and obviously it's a small gift that's much smaller than whatever the cost of their gift is. So it's not digging deep into your budget. But even those little things are really meaningful, and that is a really good idea, not just for people who are giving money, but also for people who are volunteering a lot of their time. That you can, it's a good way to keep them engaged and keep people feeling like they have some sort of ownership in the group, because they've got these thank yous, whether it's handwritten postcards. I've actually been really surprised by how much people like handwritten postcards. I've done fundraising to be able to go, to conferences before, and everybody who sent us any amount of money to help us get to the conference, I got postcards at the place where the conference was and sent them postcards from that place. And the reaction was really positive. So those are some thoughts too. something, it can be simple, but just the engagement. So I have this huge list of areas to discuss, and maybe we should do another um, another thing sometime about knowing yourself and knowing your donors and researching other potential donors. What you said about cold calling the corporate sponsors, I think that's absolutely true, and it's also true about potential large donors at all. You don't really want to cold call them because you're not going to get far, but there are lots of ways to get introductions. And when we started going through this sort of internal restructuring at Geeks Without Bounds over this summer, I sat down, Lindsay and I sat down with a friend of mine who used to run another not-for-profit here in the Seattle area, and we're like, okay, we need to figure out how we're going to raise money. And he says, well, stop thinking first. Don't think about how you're going to raise money. First, let's figure out what your story is. Who are you? What are the various stories that you have to tell? What are your successes? And it was crazy that when we first sat down and he started asking us, so what have you done in the last 4 years? We were kind of dumbfounded. We're like, we do hackathons. Okay, and what has come out of the hackathons? Software and hardware. Okay, but what specifically? And taking that time to go through and figure out, like, oh, these are the projects that we've done, but not just, oh, this is a bland line, but this is a story, and I can tell each one of these things as a story. And some of those things also you can quantify. For the first time ever, we sat down and looked at exactly how many hackathons we'd done. And, in this summer when we did our first count, we realized that we'd done more than 50. We'd done about 55 hackathons ourselves, not including hackathons that we didn't organize ourselves, but we had advised on and somebody else organized. But just the hackathons that the three of us personally ran, 55 in 3.5 years. I mean, that's actually pretty remarkable. And to have that sort of quantification of the things you've done to help you tell your story can also help you figure out who the right donors are going to be. And then when you figure out which donors you want to target, that sounds bad. I don't know a better way to say that. But the donors that you want to go speak to and ask for money and support, it might be that somebody has said, I can make this introduction, or maybe somebody just made an introduction, but you haven't yet made the ask. You've just had that first hello. Spending that time to find out as much as you can about them and what their story is, sort of an open source intelligence run. You don't need to dig into anything that you'd have to search hard for, but if they're large donors, whether they're a corporate donor or a person, they're going to have, somebody of that stature is going to have stuff out there that you can find out. It's one of the really nice things about being in the age of the internet, because in the olden days you would have had to ask friends of friends of friends to find out more about that person. Now they have a Twitter account. Read it and follow them and start engaging with them too. And that goes for both potential corporate sponsors and potential private donors. If you find a way to engage with them in social media, even before you've made the ask, they're going to start to feel warm and fuzzy about you because of the positive engagement. And then when you do make the ask, they're they're buttered up.
Right.
I'm being a bit silly, but you know what I mean.
I understand, yes.
So you guys talked about the Lunch and Learns, which sounds like a really good fundraising event, a good venue for raising awareness and funds and finding new volunteers. So there are a lot of other kinds of fundraising events that you can do, and I think we're particularly well suited for these things in the Pacific Northwest. I never would have thought of this if my own son didn't happen to be a winemaker, but winemaker dinners are a thing.
Okay.
And people spend lots of money to go to winemaker dinners. And if you find a winery that likes what you're doing and wants to support you, they will actually do a winemaker dinner as a benefit to you, which is super awesome.
Yeah.
And, you know, again, the easiest way to meet winemakers is to go wine tasting.
Yeah.
I mean, admittedly, I have it very easy because I can just go out with my son and go wine tasting. If you guys find yourself down in the Eastern Washington, Walla Walla area, I can hook you up with a young winemaker who can take you around to lots of wineries. But I know that BC has wineries too. So it's a thought. Another thought that I had for you guys was a lecture or a lecture and dinner you could do at a church. Don't shy away from the idea of doing something at a church, because the thing that you're talking about doesn't have to be religious to be at a church. There are many churches that really enjoy being involved and engaged with secular charities, and that's one area where you can totally cold call pastors and rabbis and probably imams too. I don't really have experience with imams personally, but I would bet you that probably they too. And you know, I bet you could probably even talk to Buddhist monks and be like, hey, we do this thing. Does your community have some sort of you know, lecture series that you do, or could we come and talk to you guys on a Wednesday evening or a Tuesday evening, you know, not a worship night, about the stuff that we're doing and do some fundraising. And you'll find, you know, some are just going to be like, no, we're not set up for that. But you'll actually find that a lot of them are very warm and welcoming to that idea. And if you happen to make friends with a restaurateur, doing that at a restaurant where it's a lecture and a dinner can also be something. In the same kind of way where the winemaker dinner, where winemakers will say, yeah, as long as you cover our costs, anything above that will go to you, for instance. So you work something out with a caterer or a restaurateur where you know, you cover their costs for the evening, but anything above that goes to you, and it's a, you know, whatever, $70, $80, $100 a plate dinner for them to hear lectures from one or more people that are going to tell about the work that you're doing, the best stories about what you guys are doing, obviously, not the boring, dry ones. And also, you know, this is another Pacific Northwest thing. We've got lots of amazing indie music groups. And if you guys have friends who are amazing indie music musicians, putting together a show that is a fundraiser for you, and you know, you give them money for the night, so they're getting a gig out of it, but the cost of the gig compared to the cost of the event itself, you guys are getting the profit off of the event, and it is a fundraiser, and it's billed as a fundraiser. It's going to give you exposure to their fans. It's going to give you an opportunity to do something totally fun and disconnected from the hard work in the trenches, and can be really good for raising money. Is this helpful, or am I boring you stiff?
I wouldn't say you're boring me stiff. I'd say a bunch of these things I'm actually already familiar with. The biggest issue has been a lack of capacity, and the biggest thing you said is storytelling. That unfortunately, in a similar case to you, we don't have a lot of staff, and so one of the vacant staff positions that is being filled by volunteers marketing, and so which is a big role, and so we've had a bit of difficulty having someone that can kind of coordinate what our message is for a longer term.
Mm-hmm.
So that, for me, is kind of our big focus, is getting the story down. And then absolutely, once we get that, we can approach corporate sponsors. We can have these events where we can then share those interesting stories, not the boring ones.
Right. So, so there's kind of two strategies for going after this. One is to try to find somebody who is a specialist in marketing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And another one is to really just look for somebody who is a very good storyteller, right?
Yeah.
And there are a lot of those. It's just about finding the right one who can work with you on a volunteer basis until you guys have raised plenty of money to pay them.
Yeah, that's
are all of your volunteers in BC, in Vancouver area?
In terms of organizational, yes. We do have more project-focused volunteers who offer different skills, web design, graphic arts, that kind of stuff, from all around the world. But the majority of the ones that offer kind of organizational support is, yes, Vancouver, with the exception of a few in Ottawa.
Okay, so I'm thinking. So I do have friends in the Vancouver area,
Mm-hmm.
and I can poke at friends to find friends of friends. I hate to say that I'm good at doing something, because then I'm afraid that instantly that's going to make me fail at it. But in general, I tend to be good at finding people who have these amazing skills that they can never get a job at because it's not already on their resume.
Right.
And where I can lure them into volunteer work by pointing out that if you do this thing, it pops up on your resume and looks lovely.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're doing that for a for-profit company, it's just scummy, right? But when you're doing it for a not-for-profit company, then they also get the added good feeling that they're doing something good for the world. And you guys certainly fall into that category. So if you'd like me to, I can
Absolutely, yes, please.
poke around and see what we can find in the way of marketeers and storytellers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Be a huge help.
Sounds good. In fact, I am meeting later today with somebody who is both a techie and a storyteller to help us do more of our storytelling, because we need more stuff on our blog.
Announce that, yeah.
Awesome. So is there anything else that you see in the notes that you want me to hit before we go?
That's a good question. I think for the moment I'm okay, but I will make sure that for our next meeting, I'll have an email as long as your arm with questions.
Okay, great. So one thing that I didn't talk about at all was the fee-for-service stuff. And I suspect that when Riley talks to you, it's going to be heavy on the fee-for-service stuff.
Okay.
You aren't missing anything with me not talking about it.
Okay.
Awesome. Great. So, you can contact us anytime. You don't have to wait for the 2-week meeting, but I will definitely see you in 2 weeks.
All right.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye. You too.
Bye.